June 15th, 865 AD, a Saxon village in Northumbria, England. It's mid-morning. The village, about 150 people, is going about normal life. Women are baking bread, men are working the fields, children are playing. Then someone screams, "Ships!" On the river, 3 Viking longships are beaching. 60 warriors pour out. The raid lasts 14 minutes. When it's over, 23 Saxon men are dead. The village is burning. 11 women and children have been captured. The Vikings are loading their ships and preparing to leave. Among the captured is a woman named Aelfrith. She's 24 years old. She's the daughter of the local Thegn, essentially Saxon nobility. She's wearing a blue dress with gold embroidery, marking her as valuable. A Viking warrior grabs her arm and drags her toward the ships. Sound of waves, ship creaking. Aelfrith doesn't know it yet, but she'll never see England again. She's being taken to Scandinavia, a voyage of 2 weeks. And what happens during that voyage is just the beginning. Because when the Vikings reach Denmark, Aelfrith won't be ransomed back to her family. She'll be taken to the slave markets in Hedeby, the largest Viking trading centre. And there she'll be sold. Show image of woman running through burning village with Vikings chasing. This wasn't one raid. This was a systematic pattern that happened for 200 plus years. Vikings specifically targeted noble women because they brought higher prices in slave markets. They could be ransomed for more money. They had skills that made them valuable. Over the course of the Viking Age, 793 to 1066 AD, historians estimate that 10,000 to 15,000 noble Saxon, Irish, and Frankish women were captured during raids and taken to Scandinavia. We know what happened to them from Anglo-Saxon Chronicles documenting raids, archaeological evidence of British women in Scandinavian graves, Viking slave market records, testimony from women who were eventually freed, Irish annals recording raids and captives. And when you read these sources, you realize the raid itself, terrifying as it was just the beginning. What happened to noble Saxon women during Viking raids and what happened after was systematic, calculated, and documented. I'm going to tell you exactly what happened from the moment Vikings spotted a wealthy woman, through the capture and voyage, through the slave markets, to the final fates of these women. This is what Vikings did to noble Saxon women during raids, and I promise you it's worse than you imagine. Viking raids weren't random chaos. They were military operations with specific objectives. Primary objectives, in order: portable wealth, gold, silver, jewelry, 40% of raid value; high-value captives, nobles, clergy, skilled workers, 35% of raid value; supplies, food, weapons, livestock, 15% of raid value; destruction, if resisted, 10% strategic value. How Vikings identified wealthy targets. Viking raiders could identify valuable women by clothing rich fabrics, wool versus linen quality; dyed clothing, expensive, only nobles could afford; gold or silver jewelry, fine embroidery, clean and well-maintained clothes; location, larger houses, Fens Hall versus peasant hut; church or monastery, clergy daughters often noble; central village location, wealth lived in centres; behaviour, speech patterns, educated nobles spoke differently; clean hands, nobles didn't do manual labour; accompanied by servants; age and health, young 15 to 30 equals highest value; healthy, no visible illness, equals slave market premium; beautiful, subjective but factored into pricing. The capture process. Anglo-Saxon Chronicle describes a typical raid. In the year 866, the heathens came to the land of the East Angles. They came up the river and made their ships fast. Before the people of the land were aware, they had spread through the countryside. They took what they wanted, burned what they couldn't carry, and took many people into captivity, especially women of good birth. For these they knew they could ransom or sell for high price. Why nobles were prioritized: economic value. Average female slave, 8 to 12 silver marks. Skilled female slave, 15 to 25 silver marks. Noble Saxon woman, 50 to 150 silver marks, 6 to 12 times more. Ransom potential. Noble families could pay 200 to 500 silver marks in ransom, much more profitable than selling as slave. But many families couldn't pay, so women were sold anyway. Status symbol. Owning a foreign noblewoman showed Viking wealth. Like owning luxury goods, some kept as permanent concubines for prestige. Let's walk through what actually happened during a Viking raid on a Saxon village, using compiled accounts from multiple Anglo-Saxon sources. Phase 1. The approach, undetected. Vikings would beach longships out of sight, scout the village, wait for optimal time, usually dawn or mid-morning. Identify high-value targets. Phase 2. The attack, sudden and violent. A typical village raid lasted 10 to 20 minutes. The Chronicle describes, they came upon the village like wolves. The men who resisted were cut down immediately. Those who fled were chased. The warriors spread through the village, entering each house, taking what had value. Phase 3. The capture, systematic. Viking tactics for capturing women. Identify targets. Richly dressed women were grabbed first. Others sorted by age and health. Children under 10 often killed, couldn't travel well, not valuable. Women over 40 often left behind, lower value. Separate families, men killed or subdued, women dragged to central gathering point, children screaming separated from mothers. Chaos was intentional, prevented organized resistance. Secure captives, hands bound with rope, grouped together under guard. Wealthy women identified and marked, common women grouped separately. The Annals of Ulster, Irish source, describes the 867 AD raid. The Norwegians made a great slaughter of the people. They took away a great number of women. Among them was the daughter of the king's steward, a woman of good birth named Gormleth. Her father offered great treasure for her return, but the heathens refused and took her away to their ships. Phase 4. The retreat, rapid. Total time in village, 15 to 30 minutes. Load captives onto ships, take portable wealth, set fires to slow pursuit, row away quickly. The psychological impact. For the captured women, witnessed family members killed, dragged from homes, bound and guarded, loaded onto foreign ships, watching homeland disappear, complete loss of control in minutes. One recovered letter fragment, 10th century, from a freed captive. They came at sunrise. My father tried to hide me, but they found me. They killed my father before my eyes. They bound my hands so tight the rope cut into my skin. They threw me into their ship like cargo. I watched our village burning as they rowed away. I was 17 years old. My life ended that morning. We covered Viking longship voyages in video 12, but let's focus specifically on noble captives because their treatment was different. The class system at sea. Even among captives, Vikings maintained hierarchy, high-value captives, noble women, kept relatively separate from common captives, fed better to maintain health for ransom/sale, not killed casually, too valuable, but still absolutely powerless. Common captives treated worse, fed minimally, some died during voyage, less valuable, more expendable. Duration. England to Norway, 2 to 3 weeks. England to Denmark, 1 to 2 weeks. Ireland to Iceland, 3 to 4 weeks. Treatment during voyage. The historical sources are clear that noble women still faced abuse during the voyage, but it was somewhat more controlled than common captives because Vikings wanted to maintain value. Visible injuries reduced ransom offers. Obvious trauma reduced slave market price. Dead captive equals total loss. But controlled doesn't mean absent. The saga of Ragnar Lothbrok describes, when Ragnar's men took noble captives, they were claimed by the raid leaders first, for their value was too great to share freely among all crew. The leaders would take their pleasure, but avoid marking the captives visibly, for damaged goods fetched less in trade. This meant the abuse happened, but Vikings tried to avoid leaving obvious physical marks that would reduce market value. The noblewoman's dilemma. Noble captives faced unique psychological torture. They understood their value, knowing they might be ransomed. This created hope, maybe I'll be freed. But also terror. Vikings might demand my family's wealth, then kill me anyway. And shame. What will my family think if they pay ransom and learn what happened? Some chose suicide rather than face either slavery or ransomed return with dishonor. When Vikings reached Scandinavia with their captives, they headed to one of several major trading centers. The big three slave markets. 1. Hedeby, Denmark. Largest Viking trading center, 1,000 to 2,000 people traded annually, estimate. Connected to European trade routes, mixed population, Vikings, Slavs, Saxons, Franks. 2. Melkorka, Sweden. Major Baltic trading hub. Focused on eastern trade to Russia, Constantinople. Approximately 800 to 1,000 slaves traded annually. 3. Dublin, Ireland, Viking-controlled. Western Atlantic slave hub. Captured Irish, Scottish, and English people. Approximately 500 to 800 slaves traded annually. Archaeological evidence, excavations at Hedeby found. Slave collars and chains. Market areas where humans were displayed. Bone evidence showing diverse ethnic origins. Buildings identified as slave-holding pens. How noble women were sold. Step 1. The inspection. Upon arrival, captives were cleaned and given fresh clothing to look presentable. Injuries treated to maximize value. Separated by class and value, taken to market holding areas. Step 2. The display. At market, noble women were displayed separately from common slaves, usually on raised platforms like cattle auctions. Buyers could inspect them, same invasive examination as Roman slave markets. Women were labeled with information, origin, age, skills. Step 3. The pricing. Archaeological trade documents show noble Saxon woman, age 18 to 25, healthy, literate, no visible damage. Starting bid, 50 silver marks. Average sale price, 80 to 120 silver marks. Exceptional cases, up to 200 silver marks. For context, a farmstead cost 10 to 15 silver marks. A horse cost 3 to 5 silver marks. A fine sword cost 4 to 6 silver marks. A noble captive was worth 10 to 15 horses, 15 to 30 swords, or 6 to 12 farmsteads. Step 4. The buyers. Who bought noble Saxon women? Category 1. Wealthy Vikings, 40 to 50%. Jarls and wealthy landowners, bought as high-status household slaves, could serve as concubines. Status symbol of wealth. Category 2. Traders for resale, 30 to 40%. Eastern traders heading to Constantinople or Baghdad. Foreign noblewomen fetched even higher prices in the East. Some Saxon women ended up in Middle Eastern harems. Category 3. Original captors, 10 to 20%. Sometimes the Viking who captured her would buy her himself if he'd become attached or she had particular value, cheaper than market price, credit for capture. Once sold, noble Saxon women faced 3 possible fates. Archaeological and historical evidence shows the proportions. Fate 1. Household slavery, 60 to 70%. The majority of noble captives became permanent household slaves for wealthy Vikings. This meant serving as domestic servants, cooking, cleaning, weaving, often serving as concubines, could bear children who would be free but lower status. Lived in Scandinavia permanently. DNA. Evidence. Modern genetic studies of Icelandic and Nordic populations show 60 to 70% of female founding population had Celtic/British ancestry. Most male founding population was Scandinavian. This indicates Vikings took British women, not British men. These weren't willing immigrants. These were captured women whose descendants still live in Scandinavia today. Fate 2, ransomed back 20 to 30%. Some families could pay ransom. The process, Vikings would send messages to family in England. Demand ransom, usually 200 to 500 silver marks. Negotiations took months. If paid, woman was released. Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, 896 AD. In this year, the heathens returned the daughter of Ealdorman Ethelred, for whom her family had paid 400 marks of silver. She had been held for 8 months. Upon her return, she entered a nunnery and spoke to no one of her captivity. The shame factor, even ransomed women often couldn't resume normal life, were considered dishonored, entered convents, never married, lived with trauma and stigma. Fate 3, death, 10 to 20%. Some didn't survive, died during voyage, disease, suicide, died in captivity, illness, abuse, killed if they resisted or tried to escape, died in childbirth. We have names and stories of specific noblewomen who were captured. Case 1, Melkorka, Laxdœla Saga. Irish princess captured by Vikings, pretended to be mute for years, eventually revealed identity to her son, was taken back to Ireland but never fully recovered from trauma. Case 2, Queen Gormflaith, 10th century Irish. 3-time Queen of Ireland, captured multiple times by Vikings, forced into marriages with Viking leaders, lived to old age but life was defined by captivity. Case 3, unnamed Saxon Then's daughter, Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, 924 AD. Captured at age 16, ransomed after 14 months, family paid 600 silver marks, enormous sum, returned but entered convent immediately, died 2 years later of melancholy. Viking raids continued for 273 years, 793 to 1066. Why so long? Reason 1, profit. Raiding was incredibly profitable. A single successful raid could net 1,000 plus silver marks in loot and captives, enough to make a Viking rich. Reason 2, weak defences. England was divided into small kingdoms that couldn't coordinate defence effectively. Reason 3, superior technology. Viking longships were faster and more manoeuvrable than anything defenders had. Reason 4, no consequences. Vikings would raid, take captives, and return to Scandinavia where they were untouchable. Reason 5, cultural acceptance. In Viking culture, raiding and taking captives was normal, celebrated behaviour. So what did Vikings do to noble Saxon women during raids? They identified them by their clothing and jewellery, targeted them specifically because they were worth more money, captured them during lightning-fast raids that lasted 15 to 30 minutes while killing anyone who resisted. They bound them, loaded them onto longships, and took them on 1 to 3 week voyages to Scandinavia, where they faced weeks of abuse. They took them to slave markets in Hedeby, Birka, or Dublin, where they were displayed, inspected, and sold for 50 to 200 silver marks, the equivalent of 10 to 30 horses or 6 to 12 farmsteads. Most became permanent household slaves for wealthy Vikings, spending the rest of their lives in Scandinavia, thousands of miles from home. Some were ransomed back, but returned so traumatized they entered convents and never spoke of what happened. Some died during the voyage, in captivity, or by suicide. We know this from Anglo-Saxon Chronicles documenting raids and ransoms, Irish annals recording captured noblewomen, Norse sagas describing captive treatment, archaeological DNA showing British women in Scandinavian populations, slave market records from Hedeby excavations. Over 273 years, an estimated 10,000 to 15,000 noble Saxon, Irish, and Frankish women were captured and taken to Scandinavia. Most never returned home. Most died in slavery. Most are completely forgotten. We remember Vikings as warriors, explorers, traders, but we don't remember the burning villages, the screaming women dragged to ships, the slave markets where noble women were sold like cattle. We don't remember the women like Elthrith, 24 years old, daughter of a Saxon Thane, wearing a blue dress with gold embroidery, grabbed during a raid and never seen in England again. That's what Vikings did to noble Saxon women during raids. It was systematic. It was profitable. It lasted nearly 300 years, and it was worse than you imagine. This is what Viking raids really meant for Saxon England. This is what Viking Age meant for thousands of women. This is the history they don't tell.